It'll be a miracle if you don't hear all the extra noises going on here. And I have a very complex video to do today, one that I've been wanting to do for a long time. This is going to be the accumulated wisdom of the ages, my own experience and the experience of others who came before me, in talking about how to collect the golden age of living stereo classical records. Included in this is going to be some history, why these records are important and desirable to collectors. There'll be a section on labels, of course. I'll show all the different labels that are involved in this topic. We'll talk a little bit about Dynagroove. We'll talk about how to recognize a living stereo record by the jacket, how to determine which year it was made, the range of years that are encompassed in the golden age of living stereo, what came later. We'll talk about pressing plants and more. So cleaning and recommendations. So there's an awful lot to go through. This is going to be a challenge for me, but I've pulled all the records and I'm going to try to do it. Of course, I won't be able to do it in one take, but I'm so glad you're here. Stick with me through this. It'll be broken up into chapters, so if it becomes quite long, I can't believe they're cutting down a tree now. If it becomes quite long, you'll be able to stop and then go back to where you left off at the next chapter. The golden age of living stereo is a period of time of classical recording, ranging from about 1958 to 1964. 1964 saw the introduction of a process called Dynagroove. We're going to talk about that in another video. I've already got the thumbnail made. That's going to be its own video. Suffice to say that Dynagroove was promoted as an improvement, but the audio press of the time was scathing in their dismissal of Dynagroove. Yet, it continued from 1964 on. There are still great performances in the Dynagroove era. But today we're going to be focusing squarely on 1958 to 1964, the golden era of RCA Living Stereo records. Before we get started, if you're new and haven't already, think about subscribing. I know a lot of you are here regularly, but you haven't subscribed yet. It would really help me out if you did. Just hit the like and subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and you'll be sure to get more content like this. So let's get on to this. As a child, I was exposed to RCA Living Stereo. My parents got a Magnavox console, and I was just, I mean, they must have got it in 1962 or so, so I grew up with it. And I remember these records in my parents' record collection, and I was fascinated with these records. This was the only real classical record they had, Rhapsody in Blue, Arthur Fiedler, Boston Pops, very famous living stereo record. And I used to look at that logo and like, wow, look at those speakers and all those things coming out of it. I was fascinated with this stuff, even as a 6-year-old kid. This was one that my father had, Victory at Sea. This is volume 1. There was a volume 2 and a volume 3. I have those too. These aren't the original records that were in my parents' collection, but. And this one was my mom's favorite. She would play this while she was cleaning the house or doing chores or whatever. It was so pretty to hear this. Music from the $1 Million movies, Arthur Fiedler and the Boston Pops. So yeah, I would look at these covers and I'd be just fascinated with this. Their console was kind of like this, something like that. Yeah, fabulous records. And one of the most fascinating to me was this. I gotta unsleeve all these, but I don't want to hold them up in plastic. This one, I could never determine which is the front cover, but I guess I did. No, but It always looks like this should be the front cover. The 1812 Overture, Morton Gould. Stereo Spectacular. And I used to look at that moody painting. I was like, wow, what's this record like? 1812 Overture, Stereo Spectacular, with Bolero on the other side. I remember hearing Bolero quite a bit at my house, too. That's probably why I'm sick of it today. You'll often see this Miracle Surface sticker on these early records, and I'll tell you what that means. This one was a special edition. It didn't have the big Living Stereo banner, but it did come out during the golden era of Living Stereo. So those are some early ones that I was exposed to. The reason that the period that I'm talking about is called the golden age of Living Stereo is because a number of factors came together. The art of stereo recording had just begun. In 1954 or so, RCA got on board and started recording their orchestras in stereo, even though the stereo disc wasn't ready yet. The interest in classical music was sort of at a peak. The mono era had brought a lot of people along, and with the introduction of stereo, it was natural for people to be interested in hearing orchestras spread out onto a stage in a 3D way. So the interest in classical music was at a much higher level than it ever had been, certainly much higher than today. The recording engineers. Some of the best recording engineers were working for RCA Living Stereo in this period. So they took their craft seriously, and the early stereo recordings from this period are very well done, either 2-track or 3-track recordings. Another factor is the equipment used at the time. Tube microphones, tube consoles, tube mastering equipment, all combined to give these records a particular sound that devotees love. It's a warm, lush sound that the tubes impart. And subsequent reissues don't try to capture this because they can't capture it. It is something that can only be heard on the original Living Stereo pressings. So those are the reasons why these records are so desirable. They also had some of the best performers, orchestras, and artists of the time period. People like Fritz Reiner, Arthur Rubinstein, Charles Munch, the Boston Symphony Orchestra, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. All these are superb artists that were recording for RCA before this period, but now they had the chance to record their greatest works in stereo. RCA produced the stereo recordings, as I said, in 1954. They started with 2-track, 2-microphone recordings. These were intended to be, initially, issued on reel-to-reel tape. So reel-to-reel tape was an audiophile medium. You could kind of liken it to a UHQR of today. They were very expensive, like $18 in 1958. It was an astronomical sum for one record, and it was even a short program, too. The tapes were 2-track, so they couldn't hold that much information. The tape only went in one direction, but it only shared 2 tracks. So those are coveted among audiophiles. They still command a high price today. Later on, they switched to this type of format, which is a 4-track, 7.5 IPS tape. These are the ones I've collected. The 2 tracks, I don't have a machine to play them. And of course, now there's 4 tracks, 2 in each direction. So there is a reduction in sound quality, but it's great to have reel-to-reel tapes to hear as well for this catalog. When the introduction of the stereo disc happened, RCA already had a backlog of titles because they had been recording for 4 or 5 years. So the first Living Stereo record that came out was 1806, this one. I'm not going to unwrap this because they're in vinyl storage solution sleeve. This is not the original issue. This first RCA Living Stereo recording's very hard to find in its original pressing. This is a classic records. I also have, no, I don't have the Analog Productions version because it's sold out right before I was going to get it. That might be my fault. Yeah, so this 1806 is the first. And the second was 1817, Gaieté Parisienne. Most of you know these famous recordings, or at least have seen the covers. This is actually the Analog Productions version. Again, this is a very hard record to find in its original form. You'll notice that there was a gap in the numbering system between these two records. The reason that is because RCA still had tons of mono recordings in the can that they needed to release. So they released them in the same numerical sequence as the new stereo records. So between 1817 and 1806, there's dozens of mono recordings that came out. So don't be dismayed if you're collecting Living Stereo and you don't have all the titles by number. They don't exist. I want to make a distinction here between the old mono recordings and newer mono recordings that came out. The old mono recordings were put out on a dark plum label. They look old-fashioned, and they are the older recordings before stereo was developed. In the Living Stereo era, there were mono records coming out too with the same covers. These are mono editions of the new stereo recordings, and they will share the same catalog number. The only difference will be the prefix, LM for mono and LSC for stereo. If you ever see the monos, you might think, oh, I don't want the mono, I want only the Living Stereo. Don't make that mistake, because they can at least exist as a placeholder until you find the stereo. And sometimes they are just as good or better. It depends on the material and the type of recording it is. The Living Stereo, the golden age of Living Stereo, period, like I said, ended in 1964 with the first Dynagroove record. That happened around catalog number, well, I'm going to put this one up. This is a famous one. The Power of the Orchestra was VCS. It had a different prefix for this particular record, but the same numbering system, 2659. So, you know, those records in between are pretty much all the golden age of Living Stereo. And there's about 600 titles between the American series, the Decca series, the Soria series. And yeah, I think that's it. So that is kind of a primer on the period we're talking about. Let's go into how to determine if a record is a golden age of Living Stereo by the cover. Well, that's pretty simple. Here's an example. The early Living Stereo records, the ones in the golden age period, are not all, but early ones have the Living Stereo banner like this. Very easy to recognize. When I used to collect these, I used to go, oh, yay, a Living Stereo, and pick it up. That's the easiest way to determine. There's also usually a date, publication date somewhere on the back of the cover, so you can tell what year it was issued. That's a good example of that. Here's another example. I just picked a few pretty covers for this, but yeah, the Living Stereo banner here. And this one doesn't have a date. Sometimes they don't have the date. They often have the recording engineers here, so you'll see the famous Moore Layton team, or in this case, Pfeiffer and Crawford. Both of those are engineers who are recommended. Occasionally, you'll have a situation where a record came out in two different covers, and it can get a little confusing. I'm going to show you one example here. This is the Gilbert and Sullivan Overtures with Alan Ward. This is a great record. Sounds so good. It has this odd-looking cover for one of their issues. I'm not sure which one came first, but I'm betting that came first. People said, oh, that's boring. And then they came out with this one. There's like a dozen that have two covers, at least a dozen. So don't be dismayed if you see something in a different cover. Get both. That's my advice. Okay, so after that, up until about 2400 or so. They changed from the banner to a smaller Living Stereo logo like this. This is Stokowski Rhapsodies. I have a bunch of examples of this here. These are all originals. Here you can see the Living Stereo logo there. Put these here. That's 2489. This is 2490. Piatigorsky Dvorak Cello Concerto with Boston Symphony Orchestra, Charles Munch. Here's a famous one in its original pressing. This is Reiner's Strauss Waltzes. So again, you'll see the small Living Stereo logo. I think I'll show you one more because we're getting a buildup of records here. Oh, geez. Okay, let me show you this one. This is a pretty cover. And then there's this one here. Right, Richter, Beethoven Appassionata. Yeah. Later, the covers changed again, and you'll see a very small Living Stereo logo like this. This is Pop's Roundup, Boston, and Fiedler. So you can hardly even see this. So they were slowly kind of like toning down the Living Stereo, which I don't understand why. I really like these with the the in-between label like this, but I've always loved the big Living Stereo logo. After that, Dynagroove enters, and they're always very clearly marked. Right up here, you're going to see Red Seal, RCA Victor, Dynagroove. There's no mistaking a Dynagroove record or jacket. You will see these on various labels, and I'll discuss that in a moment. Let's talk about labels. The Living Stereo label, the first label is the Shaded Dog. So let's take a look at the Shaded Dog here. This is the Rubinstein Rhapsody on a Theme of Paganini, and this is the famous Shaded Dog. It started at the beginning of this series. It is a tomato red label with shading at the upper part with Nipper and the gramophone in the center, silver RCA Victor on top, and Living Stereo across the bottom. These are the earliest pressings. These are the ones that everyone wants. The Shaded Dog has become a legend among RCA collectors, but there are options. I'm going to show you the second label. Let's see. I've got, wow. I need a white dog. Where's the white dog? Oh, here's a white dog. Okay. This is the second label. It's called a white dog label. When did this start? The white dog label started in '65. Okay, so new recordings came out on this, and also reissues of the earlier ones came out on this label. These records have the same characteristics as the Shaded Dogs. This label just simply says RCA Victor in white with Nipper in a non-shaded area, and it just says stereo at the bottom. These records are just as good as the Shaded Dogs. They have the same weight, the same everything. I mean, they are sometimes later stampers, so that is one thing, but in general, the sound doesn't change all that much. They're still considered golden age Living Stereo recordings and should not be passed up. In close examination, sometimes one will be preferred over the other. As a general rule, the Shaded Dog is preferred, but you really can't make a general rule. There's been some famous examples where a white dog was declared superior to a Shaded Dog by people like Harry Pearson. So I also referred to, I wanted to make a note here. A lot of this information has come not only from my own experience, but from the people that came before me. Harry Pearson of the Absolute Sound really started the ball rolling with talking about his favorite RCA Living Stereo classical records. So I have to acknowledge Harry Pearson. He is someone that really started my interest in this in earnest. Another is Jonathan Ballin, who published this very rare tome called the RCA Bible. The RCA Bible is unavailable. A lot of this information that I've gathered over the years came from that. And finally, before that is, do I have it here? No, I don't have it here. James Mitchell. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second. James Mitchell, The Golden Age of RCA Living Stereo. Yeah, that's a wonderful publication. All of these, well, these last two publications they were pretty much like homegrown issues. They're not really like a book that you can go out and buy. Most of them are on photocopies at this point because they are not available online. You can't even get a PDF of them. It's really hard to access the information. So that's a shame that they can't be in print, but I don't know why. But they are great resources, and I drew a lot from them, and I wanted to acknowledge those gentlemen before I go on here. The third label is called the No Dog label. Looks like that. That started about 1970. A lot of the Golden Age classical records were reissued on this. For a record like the Rubinstein, like this, you'll find it on 4 to 5 different label incarnations. Here's an example of one that I couldn't find in any other edition except a white label edition. I mean, a No Dog label. So I got it, and I'm glad I did. The No Dog labels are on thinner vinyl, and they generally have inferior sound. They're higher stamper numbers. They're still pressed at the same plants. They still have the same jackets, although a bit thinner. You will notice that. I wouldn't pass one up, though. They have very quiet vinyl, and they make for a good placeholder until you can find another copy. Lastly is this label. This is actually another copy of this. This one is the Side Dog label. So I kind of like these too. As you can see, nippers on the side there. The Side Dog label is just a continuation of the 70s label, which has a bit more of a nicer look to it. Any of these labels are worth picking up. And I want to tell you, like, when I was collecting this stuff, I have multiple pressings of a lot of these because it was an era where CD was taking over and classical record collectors were the first to go. So they dumped their records. They wanted the silent backgrounds and everything, the longer playing times of CDs. And that's when I found so many living stereos in thrift shops. I never paid more than $1 or $2 for these. Today is a similar situation where the older collectors that were into classical are starting to move on. Either they are retiring from the hobby, they had to downsize, they went to streaming, or they passed their collection on to their heirs, and their heirs don't know what to do with it. So if you're diligent in searching like thrift stores or estate sales and stuff like that, you won't have to pay Discogs prices for these. It's fun to collect them when they're cheap. And you can experiment. You can get a shaded dog, a white dog, a no dog, and compare them and find what your favorite is. There is another label to talk about, and that is the Soria series. label. The Soria series looks something like this. These are deluxe box sets with embossing, tipped-in artwork, usually a beautiful booklet. This is the Julian Bream Consort, Elizabethan Music. And RCA developed a special label for these. It's fairly ordinary. It just looks like that. The earliest ones of these Soria series sets did come in the shaded dog, but most of them have this white no dog label. Well, Soria label, we'll call it. Don't pass these sets up. They are selected by RCA for this special presentation, and oftentimes they have fabulous booklets printed by Skira in Switzerland. And these booklets all have like tipped in, actual photos tipped in here. So the color is printed separately. And they look really, really beautiful. Very nice sets. I wouldn't pass those up. Those are Golden Age stereo recordings as well. What else can I tell you about labels? I think that's about it. Let's go on to pressing plants. Pressing plants. Well, there's three. There's Indianapolis, there's Rockaway, and there's Hollywood. We don't really have to worry too much about Hollywood. Hollywood didn't have too many classical, at least on the East Coast, I never saw classical on Hollywood pressing plant. How you can tell which pressing plant you have is from a letter in the dead wax. It's all by itself across from the matrix. It's either an I, an R, or an H. The Hollywood pressings that I've seen, non-classical, are really pretty poorly manufactured. So always avoid a Hollywood pressing, in my opinion, unless there's no other choice. Of the other two, Indianapolis is preferred. They just made better records. And I think RCA considered them the premier pressing plant too. If there was only one issue of a record, it was only going to be pressed once, it was at Indianapolis. If they were doing promotional copies for, to go out to radio stations or reviewers, they were all done at Indianapolis. The physical disc is just better. The vinyl quality seems better. The discs have a certain weight, which you'll recognize after you start collecting these all the time. Certain weight and feel to them. They're usually manufactured extremely well, centered, beautiful labels, rounded edges. Yeah. If you have an opportunity to choose, go for the Indianapolis. A word about cleaning. These records need to be cleaned. They need to be cleaned, even if they look clean. I was discussing this with a friend of mine. His name is Jim, and he got really deeply into collecting living stereo, and he's into restoration. So some of you probably have heard about Kermis and his restoration system and his ultrasonic cleaner. Jim was a big believer in this, and his experiments bore it out. His theory was correct. These records, he claimed, were the most difficult to get to pristine of all the classical labels. Why that is, we're not sure, but it could be the additive, the miracle surface additive. Might have been a great idea then, but it seems to have leached out and attracted dust and dirt that takes multiple cleanings to get out. If you only have a VPI cleaner, you can still have great results, but you have to do it several times, I think, to get it quiet. Ultrasonic is great if you can do that, and restoration is even better. But no matter what you do, expect to have to clean these at 1 or 2 times at the very minimum to get them extremely quiet and clean. A word about Decca. RCA made an arrangement with Decca Records in London, in the UK, to do some exclusive recordings for them of the orchestras that were there in the halls there. And these are really true Decca recordings, but they were released on RCA Living Stereo. These are very desirable. They're quite rare here. I'm going to show you a couple of reissues that I have. 2 of them. This is Venice, George Schulte. The Royal Opera House Orchestra, Covent Garden, very famous record. This is the classic records edition. This is another famous one, Witch's Brew. You know, if you don't recognize the conductor or orchestra because they're European, it's probably a Decca recording, and it's probably engineered by Kenneth Wilkinson. So don't pass those up if you see them. There's one other thing I wanted to mention about Dynagroove. You might be like hunting for shaded dogs and come across a Dynagroove that looks like a shaded dog. This is an example of one, but look carefully at the bottom. It says Stereo Dynagroove Stereo. These are Dynagroove records, so they use this label at the beginning, and it can be a little confusing to first-time collectors. They used all the labels for Dynagroove records, and sometimes they're not even marked Dynagroove. Here's one, Arthur Rubinstein, Beethoven Piano Concerto No. 4, from the Dynagroove era. And it's a white dog. This one says Stereo Dynagroove, so it is indicated at the bottom. But yeah, so you'll see these, you'll see something that looks like a shaded dog, you'll see white dogs, you'll see whatever. Dynagroove took over, and the golden age of living stereo was over. Like I said, there's a lot of information here. I know I was a little bit all over the place with this, but I tried to keep it in some kind of consecutive order. The bottom line is, if you're collecting RCA Living Stereo, look for the original labels. So the shaded dogs are preferable. The white dogs are second, and often equal and shouldn't be turned up. The third and fourth labels are okay for placeholders, but don't expect them to sound quite as natural sounding as the first label pressings. However, there's always exceptions, and you know, for me, whenever I see anything that says a living stereo on it, I just get it. But I know today it's a little different. If you're spending money, more than a couple of dollars to pick up one of these, you want to make sure you're getting the right one. So shaded dogs, near mint condition or VG++ condition is preferred, of course. Indianapolis pressings, look for that. And what was the last thing? I forgot. I don't know. That's the basic advice for this. So I hope you got something out of this. I know it was a bit long, but at least you got to see all the labels, got some information about pressing plants, and some of my own experience with this. So until next time, I'm Scott for The Pressing Matters. Thank you so much for watching. If you really like this video, please give me a thumbs up and have a great day.